And let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, you hold our lives in your hands. All we are, all we'll ever be, is yours. We ask you to keep that in our thoughts, to help us to always put our lives in your hands, regardless what comes, regardless what's past. And we thank you for your Son who's brought us this salvation message. And we pray in his name. Amen. Okay, the apocalypse. This is a difficult session because there's a whole class about the apocalypse that takes almost a year. So if you want more detail than what we're going to do here, you need to take a class. Okay? Say yes. Yes, I didn't say you had to take it, but at least acknowledge that I've said that. Okay, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, all of them have something. John's the short one here. Okay, one verse. Okay, but Luke, we have to go to two different spots. Pick your poison.
I'll take Matthew 24.
You got Matthew.
I'll take the Luke 17.
Luke is taken now, 17.
No, okay, I'll take I'll take Mark, I guess.
How about Matthew? Did you say Mark?
Somebody said Matthew.
I said Matthew.
You got Mark then, okay. And then there's Luke 21 we'll need to look at also. You got it? Okay. That's all right. I got to do an introduction here anyway, I think. It's now Wednesday. Remember? He came in, he cleansed the temple on Monday, and then on Tuesday, and then they came after him, the leaders, and then on Tuesday he went after them. Monday he cleansed the temple. Tuesday they questioned him. Wednesday he went in and he challenged them. And this is in the evening of that same day. He's left and he's gone somewhere else. He's left the temple area, or he's going to. Luke 21, just two verses, 37 and 38, please. Yes.
In that same hour, he rejoiced in the Holy Spirit and said, not in the right place, am I?
37? 21, 37. I hope I'm in the right place.
I can't find, I go to, maybe it's my God. I go to 21 and then I go to 23.
Well,
No, he wants 20, verse,
Oh.
he wants 21,
Oh,
and
okay.
then verse 37.
oh yeah, chapter 21.
I guess I
Yeah.
better,
Chapter 20.
I guess I better wake up.
And nice and loud for the video, if you would.
Okay, now loud so I can hear.
37.
37.
You're in the right
Verse
place.
37.
Verse 37.
I thought it said 17.
Okay.
37 and 38.
Okay. Even longer. No, I'm kind of blind this morning.
She's still asleep and she's blind. This is difficult.
21st chapter.
Luke 21.
Yeah, 37 and 38.
What is,
So 37, you gotta come way over
well,
here.
I'm looking where it says 5 to 22, that's good.
You're on the wrong spot up there. That's what's throwing you.
April 5th.
37
Oh.
and 38.
The class will be over.
That's good.
For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me.
No, we're still wrong. Betty.
Okay, let me start this off. There we go. Now during the day, Jesus was teaching in the temple. But at evening, he would go out and spend the night on the mount that is called Olivet. And all the people would get up early in the morning to come to him in the temple to listen to him. So after spending the day in the temple complex, he usually spent the day on the portico of Solomon here. I usually put it up here. And this is where the leaders challenged him. This is where he challenged the leaders. Exposing the injustice of the temple cult's strict legalism without love, and forcing the religious leaders to choose to change or to act against him. Either change and do God's will or not. Jesus and his disciples prepared to leave. So now it's coming in the evening. They're going to leave the temple. Here we go. Mark 13, 1 and 2. Matthew's the same, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Mark 13,
1 and 2.
1 and 2. Okay. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down."
All right. What do you see? What's happening?
Well, one could argue that Jesus appeared to be talking about the sacking of Israel in 70 AD.
Sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD.
Yeah.
It could be.
But if you look at it, clearly he's also speaking of his own body.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
But how would the disciples, even at that point, totally understand, make that transition or transposition from the very physical, they're seeing the temple, it's there.
Right,
in
it's
front of
there,
their
touching
face,
it.
and transpose that back to Jesus.
I don't think they
in all
could.
honesty,
I don't think they could.
yeah, and yet, you got to wonder.
We have the blessing of hindsight.
That's what I was going to say,
Yeah.
because I think, when I look at it right now, I think, we're expecting a whole lot more sometimes, I think, of the disciples than is fair.
I do not expect them to understood. I don't at all.
Well, if they did understand more, could the gospel have been fulfilled? They may have gotten in the way or gotten themselves killed.
It would have changed things
Oh,
considerably.
yeah, you bet.
Don't know. Whatever it is, all we know is they did not understand. Okay? I believe there's more to it than either one of us has talked about so far. But let's at least look at this. He's talking about the rocks that are built there. Mm-hmm. There's some pretty good sized rocks. Limestone. Luke 21, 5 through 6. Who got Luke 21? Nobody? Okay, here we go. And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, "As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone upon another, which will not be torn down." Has Luke added anything that was not in Mark or Matthew?
Well, the smaller pieces, the votive gifts.
The votive gifts. Anything else that you can see that might hint something?
Well, I mean, they describe the stones as beautiful
Yes.
as opposed to something
Massive.
functional. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Herod the Great had begun to build the temple in 20 BC. It was the third temple to stand on this precise place. The original temple, built by Solomon, and then the temple of Zerubbabel, after the exile, had also been built here over the rock threshing floor of our roof. That's the rock. It's in the dome of the rock now. That is the threshing floor. That is where the temple was built. Any question, thought, or comment?
Be a good place for a threshing floor, nice and clean.
Oh, it's been chipped out, people taking tourist things. Okay. The disciples, most from rural Galilee, were very impressed by the buildings, and were talking about how magnificent they were. Overhearing them, Jesus stopped, faced the disciples, put his hand on one of the huge walls, and told them that the temple would be destroyed. just as it had been destroyed by Babylon, because the leaders would reject the Messiah. Then Jesus turned and continued walking. Make sense? Sounds like what happened. Question, thought, or comment?
Well, just that when the temple was rebuilt before, there was something to rebuild from. When the Romans were done, they didn't leave anything.
They didn't leave very much, that's a fact.
Yeah.
They were really good engineers and knew how to knock stuff down, as well as build things up. Okay? All right. Now, let's go on a little bit. The disciples followed in stunned silence, and here's the key. Would God really allow his abiding place to be destroyed? This is God's abiding place. That's what he said. I will abide here. This is where they felt God was located, at the temple. If the temple is destroyed, what happens to God? His home would be destroyed. Did that happen?
His home destroyed?
Yes.
The temple was destroyed.
Thank you.
By our theology, he doesn't need a temple to reside in.
Good. Where is his temple today?
Spirit lives within us.
There you go.
It seems to me that Jesus may have been saying something like, not only will the building be destroyed, but the cult will be destroyed. And the message we've given to others, and I will abide where? In their hearts. So I think he had a second meaning to it, but I think it wasn't the body. He explains that later. But I think it was the fact he believed the temple cult would be destroyed, that Judaism would change, and that Christianity would eventually take.
I can't help but, again, I don't mean it's like a broken record. I
He-
do
he-
not understand
No.
why he would choose to talk, if that were really the way he talked to them,
Uh-huh.
knowing them, why he would choose to talk in a manner that they couldn't talking to you, say my language instead of English is Japanese, and I'm talking to you in fluent Japanese, and I'm expecting you to understand me.
Right. I didn't say he was expecting them to understand. The message may have been for somebody else. The future. Us.
Well, we
He
do
always spoke
know.
on two levels, remember, always.
We do know that all the things that happened were revealed to them after his resurrection. We have words
Right.
telling us that.
Up till today, yeah.
And so I think he's loading up the magazine, if you will,
Good.
filling them up with the information they're going to need.
And remember, these are written 40 years after Jesus has died and been resurrected. So the author is understanding it better. And maybe forming it in certain ways. I don't know.
But
What?
actually, when it was written, even 40 years later, that still had not happened. Would have been another 30 years after that.
It depends on which gospel you read.
Yeah.
Say again, please.
Okay, so the Gospels were written 40 to 50,
About
whatever.
70 AD, 60 to 70 AD,
Okay, but
right?
some earlier.
Right.
Yeah, so this could have still been, some of the Gospels could still have been written before the actual destruction.
Right. Mark probably was before, but there's hints. But Matthew and Luke appear to be written after the destruction. Anyway, here we go. They walked across the Kidron Valley to the western slope of the Mount of Olives. This is the Mount of Olives looking east to it. Right, this is from the temple looking at the Mount of Olives, where Jesus was in the habit of spending the evening with his disciples. See all those olive trees? Okay? They would go over there, and in the Garden of Gethsemane area, they would sit down, spend the evening talking to people, teaching, etc. Then he would go up, over the top, and down the other side to Bethany. Mark 14, 1 through 2.
Okay, Mark 14.
1 and 2.
It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, "Not during the festival, or there might be a riot among the people."
Okay, so this is the backdrop. Jesus is leaving the temple area, but at the same time, what's happening?
Well, they're plotting against him,
They have decided he must go.
but they're also afraid of of an insurrection that would bring the Romans in, clearly.
Any kind of riot of any sort would bring in the Romans.
Yeah, so clearly they want to avoid that, so they're trying to find a way to do this quietly.
Ah,
Sneakily.
Yeah.
yes. They're going to try to find a way to silence him, but after it's over, they want to take him out, period. They are totally now committed to eliminating him. Luke 22, verses 1 and 2. We are struggling this morning, aren't we?
Well, it sounds from that as though actually they were, from what you just said, they were planning to probably deal with him after Passover.
Well, they wanted to deal with him before, but they had to find a way to do that. Otherwise, they would have to do it afterwards. They just couldn't risk the Romans and the riot if people would riot. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll get back to what this, I had a thought that just crossed my mind.
Okay.
Okay, Luke 22, 1 and 2. Now the festival of the unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of people.
See, same thing. Okay, here we go. Meanwhile, as they're leaving the temple area, Jesus is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Meanwhile, the religious leaders had a meeting in the palace of Caiaphas, the high priest. That's a nice little palace there, isn't it? Who had taken over after the Romans forced Annas to leave the official position. Notice 3 entryways, the fire pits. This is the 4 inside. This is open, so inside it you can meet surrounded by the walls here, and you reside around here, and it's all very defendable. Okay, pretty nice place. Okay, this is the model of the palace of Caiaphas, the high priest. I ask you to remember this. Okay? And you can see from there's a doorway there. You'll be able to see through into some other areas later on around this fire pit. Okay? So this is the palace of Caiaphas. Any question, thought, or comment?
It's taken a little while to build that. That was amazing, they can do that.
Yeah, it's amazing how they tax the people to do it.
Yeah.
It's our money. They're using it for the benefit of all, of course.
Right.
Yeah. They decided that Jesus' popularity with the people and antagonism to the religious leaders could very well lead to a riot. Then the Romans would be justified in mobilizing their troops to control the riot and would further restrict what religious freedoms the Jews had. Jesus must be arrested, but not before Passover day. However, afterward, even during the festival of unleavened bread, the crowds would be smaller and the guards could deal with Jesus. You see the thinking here. Question, thought, or comment?
In my mind, it's just that with them seeking to do away with him in private, that sets us up for understanding a whole lot of things that are yet to come.
Absolutely. And how typical it is for those in power to just try to do things quickly and quietly on the side. They don't want people to know. For example, in a Middle Eastern country today, there was a woman who died because she was wearing her apparel incorrectly, according to them. She died in custody. And it was all done quietly, but finally the word got out, and you can see the riots they've been having for a month and a half now. That's typical of bureaucracy. They tend to they don't want to interrupt and interfere people if they can avoid it, because it might change things. It's normal, it's the way things are. Any questions, thoughts, or comments? The disciple John, who had friends that worked for the chief priest, later heard the rumor of the plans to arrest Jesus and told Jesus and the other disciples. So Jesus gets word that they're out to arrest him. John does have friends there because they will recognize him later and allow him to enter into the palace and such, which is how I can be sure that he had the friends.
Is there something in Scripture? That's new
Yes.
to me. I don't remember
What?
there being that John warning him of that.
Well, it doesn't say that specifically, but Jesus knew about it. It was rumored they would have to get him. But we know that John had acquaintances in the palace.
Yeah, we know that.
See? And that's the only connection I can see where it would work, where you could get information. Servants hear things, and they'll pass the word on. So this is my interpretation, my figuring this part out. Remember, I do a lot of little thinking on this stuff.
And then Judas would have heard about this.
Correct, as will all the rest of them. Good, very good. Okay, here we go. Mark 13, 3 and 4. Who's got Mark anyway?
I have.
Okay, thank
Sorry,
you.
13, 3 and 4, we're
Right.
backing up. Okay. When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us when this will be, and what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?"
Okay. Note who was there. Peter, James, John, and Andrew. What happens to Peter later? He's crucified. What happens to James later? He's beheaded. What happened to Andrew, I don't remember. But John lives to be a very old person in tradition. I just bring that to your attention, that Jesus is going to give this information to those 4 disciples.
Well, and this has kind of been his inner core, if I remember right.
Correct. The two sets of brothers.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, here we go. Once Jesus and the disciples arrived at the olive press on the Mount of Olives, Peter, James, John, and Andrew were alone with Jesus, and that's important. They sat down on the hillside facing west, with the city of Jerusalem across the Kidron Valley. Here we're on the Mount of Olives, looking at the Temple Mount, here, the platform where the temple was built. Straight out to the west. They wanted to know more about Jesus' comment about the destruction of the temple. Okay? They're talking about the physical destruction of the temple. They want to know more. When's this going to happen? Question, thought, or comment? God will destroy the temple and Jerusalem, Jesus told them, as God had done when he sent the Babylonians to destroy Solomon's temple, if the leaders do not change their way. Both Micah and Jeremiah had prophesied the destruction. Are they going to change their way? They're already plotting to kill him. They're not going to change. Okay. Mark 13, 5 and 6. I'm taking little pieces at a time here.
Okay, 5. Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray.
See, no, this makes no sense here, does it? Why would he suddenly talk about people coming, pretending they're him, to lead people astray? This is the gospel writer trying to figure something out. Okay, go ahead.
Well, maybe also that indicates how confusing it was for them at the time.
Yes.
You know, it's like, okay, we know now what he meant, but at the time it was like, I don't get it.
I agree. They totally don't understand this. I totally agree with that. Jesus spoke of false prophets and false messiahs, appearing to lead many astray. By the way, messiahs popped up all over the place during these times. So the last 20 years before this and things like that, they popped up all the time. I'm the Messiah, I will lead you. Okay? Others would try to take advantage of the situation to gain power by misleading the people and telling them what they expected to hear and wanted to hear. We will pressure the Romans to leave. Then we will establish an independent Jewish nation, they will promise. Do not believe them. That is not God's plan. This is a summary of what I believe he was saying. How often do politicians tell you what they think you want to hear? It's normal for people to do that. It's a normal situation.
But how many of the religious leaders are using that tool the reverse way? Using the politicians to get what they want.
Well, they are the politicians, and yes, you're right. And they are, I believe there was a fair amount of this manipulation going on.
Because I can see that even more so today than ever. These religious, I don't want to, groups that have their
Following.
and their beliefs, and they are tuning in to these politicians, to use the politicians to create laws to get their ways.
Ah, yes. Okay. It's always been that way. It'll always be that way. That's human nature.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't have any qualms about that.
Well, and then with this particular thing, all of the Old Testament prophets, you know, Jeremiah, and I'm reading Ezekiel right now, and it's like, you know, tell them this is going to happen, and the, you know, the other prophets go, oh, no, everything's going to be fine, and
Tell them what they want to hear, so that, and then kill off the prophet, and then when it happens, oh, we didn't know. So, it's human nature. It's the way we are. So just be aware that I believe that Jesus expected this. Jesus saw it, and he saw that once he then may have seen that once he died and was raised, leading them into a heavenly kingdom instead of an earthly kingdom. Others would pop up going, do it this way, we'll get rid of the Romans. The zealots were very good at that. We'll get rid of the Romans, drive them out, then we'll set up our earthly kingdom as God has promised us. We are therefore the right Messiah. Don't believe them. That's not God's plan. We can look back and see that it was not God's plan. That doesn't mean they could understand it then. So he's warning them. Okay? Anything else? Okay, Mark 13, 7 through 8, which is also in Matthew 24, 6 through 8. Same thing, basically. Mark 13, 7 and 8.
When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines, but this is but the beginning of the birth pains.
Okay. Now, most of you have read the book of Revelation at some point or heard something about it. You're starting to sound familiar?
Sure.
Okay? And I'll explain that later too. Okay, what do you see? What's he telling them?
Well, you're gonna have trouble.
It's going to be a trouble time.
And we can look around today. There was just a giant earthquake in Malaysia.
Yeah, absolutely.
My daughter was there 3 days ago. Yeah, but, it's a case where Jesus is saying you will have these things take place.
Yes.
And we can look around today and certainly see it.
That's right. I agree with you. And it's been that way for a couple thousand years anyway, right? And a couple thousand years before that too. So, but this is not the end. It is not the end. That's important. It's the beginning of the birth pangs. I don't know about birth pangs. I just watched it happen. Someone else told me all about it. Ow! Okay, Luke 21, 9 through 11 reads as follows. When you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately. Then he continued by saying to them, nation will rise against nations and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes, and in various places plagues and famines. There will be terrors and great signs from heaven. What do you see now? This is before the destruction of Jerusalem, before the temple. He's talking about before that happens, there's going to be all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me those things haven't happened.
Oh, I would never say that.
Continue to happen. But one of the things when he says there's signs from heaven, we call them today by a different name. We call them acts of God.
That's sweet. That's true. It's true. So, but he's added plagues and famines and other things that are typical of life. That's the way it is. Added to wars and disturbances, rumors of wars, riots, revolutions, things like that. It's going to be a tough time. And then the signs from heaven to them meant something very different. There's a heavenly kingdom and an earthly kingdom in the sense that what happens up there in the court of God will precede or warn you about what's going to happen down here on earth. Two levels, remember that. Okay? So for them it's a very specific thing when they talk about signs from heaven. Jesus warned them there would be wars, rebellions, droughts, famines, plagues, and earthquakes as God prepared for the judgment day, which I've added. Okay? Just as Ezekiel and Jeremiah had once prophesied against Israel and Judah. Matthew 24, 9 and 10. We are just not with it today, are we? Probably the weather. That's probably it.
Here we go.
Okay.
Then they will hand you over to be tortured and will put you to death, and you will be hated by all the nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another.
Oh, this sounds awful. Now he's added this, okay? That there's going to be torment and torture, okay? Kill, hatred, betrayal. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. That's why I say this is kind of like an introduction of Jesus. He's kind of telling James, John, Andrew, and Peter what's coming, how it's going to come. But it never fully develops until John writes about it in the Revelation, where he takes all of this and puts it together in the vision that he has then. John had to do it. He was the only one left who had been here with Jesus, and it was revealed to him later. That's my opinion. that it was the same John. Mark 13, 9 through 13.
Okay, I got that.
Thank you.
As for yourselves, beware, for they will hand you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them. And the good news must first be proclaimed to all nations. When they bring you to trial and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever is given to you at that time, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all because of my name, but the one who endures to the end will be saved.
Wow, the disciples would have loved to hear this, wouldn't they? But remember, it's written 30 years after Jesus has died and been resurrected. And there's been persecutions, haven't there been? So this is also maybe a description of what has been happening to them. And it's kind of filled out what Jesus indicated back then when they were on the Mount of Olives. Do you see that? Does that sort of make sense? This detail would not like, Jesus was not one, during his ministry, to let them live by sight. He wasn't one to give them such detail as this. His was one of take it by faith. There's just so much detail here that I feel that it's been filled in by the church, that is by Mark.
Well, it seems to me that this is like a primer to world politics. I mean, let's face it, there's nothing new here,
No, not really.
and it's currently going on,
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah.
But on the other hand,
Good.
after, I think he wanted them to be prepared
Yes,
for what was going to come.
yes.
Because, they still thought
He
he
was
was
gonna,
going to be the Messiah that would bring peace then.
right.
Well,
good point.
And then,
military
so
Messiah.
Once he's died and risen, well, yes, I see now. But, you mean we still are going to have problems?
Good.
In some ways, it's horrible to think, but it's almost an encouragement because it's, yes, I know this is all going to happen, and I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go through this kind of stuff
Yeah.
before the
Good.
end.
Good. So Jesus uses this time to tell these four, who would then share with others, that they were going to be these terrible sufferings. Good. Okay. Anything else? Yes, there are places today where those who are followers of the Lord are being persecuted. Okay? I don't have to go into detail with that at this point. Luke 21, 12 through 9, that makes no sense whatsoever. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, and delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will perish. By endurance you will gain your lives. What? What is he saying?
So I would specifically think that he's talking about life after death at this point,
Okay.
not the here and now.
It's not this hair on my head, it's my spirit.
Yeah.
Physical versus spiritual.
Thank you. Good. And what is it that's going to get us through?
Faith.
Faith, always. Faith in the Lord. Okay? and endure whatever happens. And yeah, you endure to your death. Endure what you can, scream, whatever it's being while you're being tortured. But those who put their lives in the hands of the Lord will be saved. Anything else? You see, we have a lot of things we're going through here. It's kind of hard. It's a difficult session. Here we go. Jesus then told the disciples that they would personally suffer at the hands of others because they were followers of Jesus and doing God's will. You'd expect to face the same kind of opposition that I face, said Jesus, from the people, from the religious leaders, and from the political leaders, the Romans. You will be persecuted because you follow me. It will test your courage and your faith. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it looks, proclaim the kingdom to the very end. That's a message to all of us today as well. And people in Islamic countries where they're not allowed to talk about being a follower of Jesus, they are persecuted just like this today. Or in countries where atheism was the law of the land, they're persecuted for that as well. Here they're just persecuted because people think they're stupid. They're weak. They're believing in something they shouldn't. It's really secularism that's important. And we are persecuted in different ways and in different degrees. Endure. Hold to your faith. Any other thing? Question, thought, or comment?
When I get to this point, what always jumps out at me at this, I don't know why at this point, but when I was in Japan, it brings back the story of the time when the last emperor before the First World War, who was trying to keep out the Europeans from becoming the influence they became, and that included their religion,
Yes.
set, I want to say it was 7 priests, Japanese priests. And they were told, I can't imagine this, they were brought, and he used them as an example, just like Jesus was used by the Romans. And they were brought before the whatever, and they were told to renounce their faith. And they refused. And there is a shrine, if you will, or a monument, I should say shrine. But there is a monument made to them in Nagasaki, I think it's Nagasaki, not Hiroshima. And the point I'm making is that they were so revered for standing up for their faith, but it cost them their lives because they would not renounce Christ. And it backfired on the emperor because what he wanted to accomplish failed because they did, obviously, all those people, Europeans came in, right, so on, that we are going to be tested.
Yes.
We never know when. And I look back over my shoulder at all of the saints who have gone before me that have had to deal with that, and I can't imagine that. I just can't put my mind around it.
Yeah, I can't either. Yeah, no. We've had it very good here. People may not believe us or like us, but we're not persecuted in that way. And that alone is also another test that challenges our faith. If a knife is not sharpened by the sharp stone, it loses its sharpness. That's another thing.
The letter to the church at Laodicea, we become lukewarm.
Yeah, and that's true. We want to fight that too. Here we go. Jesus continued, "You will be persecuted, beaten, jailed," such as in Acts, "be put on trial before various authorities, and even put to death, just because you confess that I am the Messiah. You should not plan ahead what to say, because God will give you speech just as he gave it to Moses. You should also expect that your family and neighbors who do not believe will betray you to the authorities, as Micah had prophesied when Assyria was sent by God to destroy the northern 10 tribes of Israel." Matthew 24, 15 to 22.
So when you see the desolating sacrifice standing in the holy place as was spoken by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down to take what is in the house. The one in the field must not turn back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight might not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for at that time there will be great suffering, such as has not been seen from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no one would be saved, but for the sake of the elected, whose days will be cut short.
Okay. Hang in there. So let's put it in their terms. When the Romans come in to destroy all of this, run. And you better hope you don't have a nursing baby, because you'll starve to death in the hills. You better hope you're not pregnant, you'll never make it, or they'll slit you open. You better hope it's not in the wintertime, you'll freeze to death trying to escape these armies that are coming to destroy Jerusalem. That's what happened. Okay? The phrase I want you to look at is the abomination of desolation, which is spoken through the prophet Daniel. The abomination of desolation. That's the phrase I want you to be specifically aware of. Any question or thoughts so far? Okay, here we go. Jesus alerted them to watch for one particular sign that would precede the destruction. Watch for the desolating sacrilege. Watch for something to be established in the temple that would make it an unclean place. That would be an abomination to God. The prophet Daniel had predicted just such an event in 160 BC, and the Maccabees had to deal with such a thing in 140 BC. Okay, do you remember what happened back at the time that Daniel predicted for the Maccabees? Do you remember what the desolating sacrilege was? No, but you're going to find out. You want to take a shot?
No, I can't remember if it was sacrificing a pig or it was putting the image of the Caesar in there. I can't.
It was the pigs
It was
for
the
Daniel
pig, okay.
at the time. Okay, and then of course in the temple area they brought in their signs. It is making the altar impure. Is the desolating sacrilege that Daniel predicted and that the Maccabees had to deal with. Okay, and now Jesus is saying, when you see this again, be aware. Okay, here we go. Maccabees 1, 54 to 64, don't worry. Now on the 15th day of Shivlez, I don't know, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege upon the altar of burnt offerings. That's reported in the book of Maccabees. Okay, now let's find out what Jesus, that's what happened in Daniel's time. Jesus is predicting the same kind of thing. Right? Here we go. Luke 21, 20 through 24. Who got the Luke? Okay, here we go. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave. And those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant, to those who have nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword. They will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. How do we understand this? There's a lot of speculation on all of this. If you want to understand it better, you need to take a class in the book of Revelation. It's the only way to really understand it. Jesus is setting them up to understand it. He is revealing this to the 4 disciples, of which only John is going to be alive later to be given insight by the Spirit to write the book of Revelation. That's my interpretation. The moment one hears that the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple is about to occur because an army will surround Jerusalem, do as Amos prophesied at the approach of the Assyrians, and leave immediately. There must be no delay. There will be great suffering, such as Isaiah spoke of at the approach of Babylon. Believers will be taken captive by foreign armies and taken from the land, as Micah and Ezekiel predicted, and the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed. As will the temple cult. Be aware that there would be those who will claim to be sent by God and who would attempt to lead the people to believe in a political kingdom and a military might. There would also be some who would claim to be prophets from God. They would perform miracles and signs that would seem to be acts of power from God. But these signs must be tested to determine if they are true or false. Confusing, isn't it? It's going to be a difficult time.
Before we move on to that point, that's when I look at it right now, of what's going on in our world, because it's so confusing, I look at the question marks every day that leaves in my mind when I look at the paper, and the threats that are coming from countries that it's always been in my generation a threat, and that's nuclear annihilation.
Yes.
And we are constantly being threatened with annihilation.
Yes.
And it seems to me we're getting so close to that now.
Yes.
And that it is absolutely spooky. You've got the threat from Korea, from North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the threat from Russia. So you're getting it from both ends.
And China. Go ahead.
Yeah, but not. And I just cannot put my mind around what would push someone to the point of saying that we have the right to annihilate.
In the case of Iran, there would be a theocratic reason that it would be something like that. There's always something that might just trigger it, and if it triggers it, what do? I don't understand. But anyway, it's the first time in history where it's truly possible. Okay, test the signs. Mark 13:24-25 reads, "But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken." See? Signs in the heavens, remember? Okay? Luke 21. "There will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on earth dismay among nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of heaven will be shaken." You see, all this disruption everywhere is being predicted here. So let's go on. "There will be awesome occurrences that would be visible to all in the world who have the eyes to see them. The sun, the moon, the stars will be affected. Amos, Isaiah, Zephaniah, and Joel all had visions of these events. And finally, into Matthew 24:30, one verse. What does it say?
Then the signs of I think I got that correct.
Yep.
And then the signs of God, or excuse me, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.
Okay, note, it's a detail. It starts with a sign in the heavens. A sign. And after that, the Son of Man will come. There's a sign that comes first. Then the Son of Man will come. In the glory of God. All these details, Jesus is telling them. The heavenly powers would be shaken, and there would appear a sign in the heavens that would represent the Messiah. What sign? Don't know. He just says there will be a sign.
They recognize it when they saw it.
Precisely. Okay? Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then the Messiah would come on the clouds of heaven, that is, in the glory of God, as prophesied by Zechariah and Daniel, and all who have the eyes of faith will see him. Now, I've added that carefully. Those who don't have faith won't see it or won't understand it. Okay? Only those who have the eyes of faith will see him. In Mark 13:27, and then he will send forth the angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds and from the furthest ends of the earth to the furthest end of heaven. Matthew 24:31, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds and from the ends of the sky to the other, from one end of the sky to the other. Whew. At the sounding of the trumpet, God's messengers would be sent to every part of the earth to gather the believers, as Isaiah announced. So there will be a sign of the Messiah. Then the Messiah will come and send forth his messengers out in the world to gather everybody together. All the followers who have faith. As to when these things will occur, keep alert. There will be general signs such as Noah had, but as to the precise moment when any one thing will occur, it will come quite suddenly, because only God knows the detail. Always be ready. And that's for us today as well. Always be ready. Questions, thoughts, or comments? You need to take a class on the book of Revelation if you want to know more about this.
I think the only thing that gives me strength is the word that you keep pushing on us, and that's the word faith. I don't know how to stand otherwise that I could possibly have the strength to move forward other than to know that through my faith, my belief in what Jesus Christ has taught me, that I can, I don't even try, to me it's not even a question of trying to understand what this says, other than just at the right time, at the right place,
It'll happen.
it will be explained.
And Finn Eskildsen, I have to mention him, said, well, all of this is very interesting, we just have to have faith. That was his whole thing. It's all interesting, curious, but it's all back down to faith. And next time, and Matthew, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate them from one another as the shepherd separates sheep from goats. And he will put the sheep at his right and the goats at his left. Jesus reminds the disciples that in the future there will be a day of judgment as prophesied by Ezekiel. The Messiah would then sit on the throne of judgment, and true followers would be separated from false followers and non-believers, and each sent to an eternal place. Here we go. Many years later, the Apostle John would remember these things, and under the influence of the guidance of the Holy Spirit, write a letter to the churches of Asia Minor about the coming apocalypse. Take a class. Then Jesus got up, and they all joined the other disciples. Jesus instructed the disciples to be ready at all times by telling them the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. He told the parable of the slave and the talents to encourage the disciples to proclaim the gospel. Then Jesus told the parable of the sheep and goats. They would understand how a believer should act. And in Luke 17:25, but first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. Jesus must suffer and be rejected. Matthew 26, there it goes, and there it goes, and there it goes. Judas hears it and believes what Jesus is saying, but he's very confused. And next time we get together, we'll be preparing for the Passover.